Okay, so Gail, let's start talking about some stuff that we've been saying behind the scenes about how EMF is affecting people. But I had a conversation with someone that lives in Massachusetts, just outside of the Boston area, and she was explaining her experience with long hauler syndrome, all right?
Okay.
And she was so bad that she was thinking about suicide, all right? And I know that that's a real thing because, there are many people that suffer from long haulers. And so she started to go into like how could she treat it. She started reading about it. She started watching YouTube videos. So when the medical establishment just keeps on thinking there's no treatment for something, then people either go into a cocoon and wish they were dead, or they try to fight back and try to find some sort of solution. So she was experimenting with different ways to try to treat her symptoms. Okay. Now she in the recording that I did with her, that is published on all my on 5 of the channels right now, or 4 of the channels at this moment. Actually, it's premiering on one of the YouTube channels. I did 2 versions. I did an edited version and I did a long version that's unedited. For obvious reasons because of the censorship on YouTube. But the big takeaway that I have is that she kept on saying that long haulers is a overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, and that individuals that have long haulers have this reoccurrence. And it gets so bad that she calls it it shuts down. Now, the theory on this is that the body can get overstimulated with the sympathetic nervous system where it'll actually collapse. It'll actually shut down. Now, part of this is that there is remember we were talking about epigenetic memory?
Yeah.
So, there is kind of a cranial nerve memory, and especially with the vagus system. All right. So cranial nerve 10. But the central nervous system has a memory. All right, of a prior catastrophic event to the body. Now, it could be either emotional or it could be physical, but there is a memory. Now, obviously, there's memory in neurons, right? Because that's how we know stuff, right? But there is a memory within the central nervous system to respond to stress. So when individuals that have gone through a post-traumatic stress situation, it overactivates this sympathetic system. And for different people, it'll affect different things because your nervous system activates the hippocampus, that activates the endocrine system. So some people may have, kidney, issues, or some sort of thyroid issue, or some sort of impotence issue, or digestive problems. But the thing here is that the body has a memory of some sort of stress, either physiological stress or emotional stress. And so if the individual, let's say, contracted a virus, and, let's say in 2020, I'm trying to be generic with some of my terms here for YouTube, but let's say someone contracted a virus in 2020, and it was, it caused them a lot of distress, and maybe they're even having some sort of exercise intolerance right now. That stress could continue activating that emotional stress can continue activating the sympathetic nervous system. And when that is happening, you start to get more cortisol levels, you get pro-inflammatory cytokines, it activates the immune system, and it's kind of like an autoimmune disorder because it's attacking the body, because it's just in chronic stress. People start to age quicker because of the high cortisol levels and just this profile that is just of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So then we know that from my discussions with Mike Adams back in 2020, there was an article that he wrote about NF-kappa beta being activated by EMF. All right. Now, and then there was talk about how E7, now the ones that listen to my channel know what E7 is, but you just, but it is a type of radio frequency for devices to hear phone calls, right? So E7 was discussed in 2020 being the disease of the time. Now I never thought that. I had people on the show that did and talked about it, in detail. But I think what is happening is that the misunderstanding of the E7 and of EMF at the time is now being explained more by just activating pathways that are pro-inflammatory that puts the body in a stressful situation, and therefore it elicits these syndromes, the fatigue and whatnot. And individuals that have had different types of infections, let's say like Epstein-Barr or GBS, have something similar. So that was kind of the big takeaway, that as long as you can kind of bring down that sympathetic response, then you can mitigate the tachycardia, you can mitigate the fatigue, you can mitigate the sleep disorder and some of these other things. Now, not everybody with the long haulers present the same. Some people, it's more, about tissue damage. Some, it's more central nervous systems. Some of it's just localized to a particular organ. Some have, the whole smorgasbord. So, that's what happened yesterday. And this dovetails with the conversations that we've had offline. So, I think it's time for our conversation to kind of reach the light of day about what we think is happening. And for the listeners, keep in mind there is a synergy that can happen with EMF and the crisis that we just went through. Now, they could be disparate too. There are situations where no one had, was affected by EMF, and they had COVID pretty bad, right? I'm not saying that you need an EMF to cause COVID, but what I am saying is that if someone is around an EMF field, then you are adding to the probability of having a pro-inflammatory response that could manifest into syndromes that we've been trying to describe through this crisis. So with that, Gail, let's.
Would you like me to?
Yeah, let's
tell everyone what's been going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so most of your listeners already know me, but I consider myself an extremely healthy person. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't do drugs. I eat very well. I do a lot of detoxing. I'm in health and wellness. I have a recipe book. I bottle my own essential oils. I do many different modalities, coaching, consulting, yoga, you name it. And I am experiencing something, and I'm starting to understand things on a different level than previously before in regards to EMFs. So what do I mean? What I mean is I can do all these different modalities, And I did very well during the, let's call it the 2020 days. And I have been working with Paul in the background for a very long time, many years now. And so I am suddenly in the last year, or have been for the last year, experiencing something that is very different. Now, just a little more backstory is, as many people know, I've been very involved in civil liberties. I am, or was a part of Arizona for Safe Technology, Yavapai for Safe Technology. That was merged into Children's Health Defense, Arizona, and also part of the medical freedom groups. So I'm setting this up so that people can understand. I have been aware of what we're calling the E7 towers, and also the smart meters and the dirty electricity and the pulses and all of that. And I also have been very aware of and advocating for being able to explain to people and educate people what is in some of the cocktails, some people call them. And so I have a very wide background and coming from all different angles. And so I always tell my clients that we want to increase the nutrients and decrease the toxins. And I've been doing that for 8 years. I helped to reverse the symptoms that get the diagnosis for autism for one child of mine, and I helped another child of mine who couldn't walk be able to walk and perform like any other child physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. And another child of mine who had skin issues. I've helped other people in many different ways, but of course I'll keep that information private. And so I have gone through all these different things, and then during the 2020 experience, I was teaching people how to use essential oils and different things that they could do to help them heal themselves. And so I recently became the very unfortunate, how do I put this? I have gone through something that is kind of traumatic in regards to EMF. So within the last year, I moved from my beautiful 6-phase garden area to something a little more remote that I thought I would expand what I had been doing. I thought I would have an office combination within my home and grow this huge garden. And so I moved out farther away into the mountains only to discover something. So the first thing I discovered was that moving into a new build is not exactly a good idea in regards to EMF, and we'll get into that. And I also discovered that the smart meters, especially the ones on these new builds in these newer areas and newer communities, which I like to refer to as the compounds, definitely has something going on that we need to discuss more. And also, there is a dental component to this long 2020 issue, we'll call it. I'm not sure what words I could use nowadays. And so to kind of set that all up, I'll just jump right in. Paul and I, back in August, September, were talking about how I was starting to hear a frequency in my right ear. As many people know, I'm very intuitive, I'm very sensitive. I'm not like the whole, woo-woo expansion, but I do have some extra abilities just from being very in tune with things. And so I started hearing this frequency in my right ear, and I didn't quite know what it was. I couldn't quite pinpoint the sound, but it started affecting me mentally and physically very, very suddenly.
Can I interject, Gail, just so for the listeners that aren't medically inclined? We have cranial nerves. We have 12 of them, and one of the cranial nerves deals with hearing. All right, that's cranial nerve 8. So, just keep that in mind when we're, talking about parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems being disrupted, during the crisis, the 2020 crisis, and through this whole EMF thing. So just keep that in mind. All right, go ahead, Gail.
Okay. And then also just adding on to what you just said quickly before I continue is there is a book called The Invisible Rainbow. It's a history of electricity and life. And around page 245 or so, it does talk about how certain people can hear electricity and electromagnetic frequencies. And it has to do with the way the ear is set up and such. So just to kind of explain also from a scientific perspective, like how am I actually hearing this? Because some people would find that very odd. In fact, I didn't even know what I was experiencing. I had to go through a little bit of a journey to figure this all out. So I, getting back to the story, started hearing this frequency in my right ear. And it started making me feel very fatigued. I couldn't focus. I started losing control of what I was doing. I couldn't remember what I was doing. And then it went from, and this was right when I was doing a show with Paul. I had done a show with Dr. Paul. I don't have the exact date right now, but somewhere around that time period, I want to say like early September or so.
This was when Alex Jones. This is when the Alex Jones.
This was the Alex Jones discussion, and I thought that I was getting hit with something because I had talked about that insert in the genome that, in reference to this 2020 crisis, we'll call it. And so the next day, I started having a very raspy voice. And you and I were going to do another show within a few days. And I started having this raspy voice. And then I started having heart palpitations. And then I started having trouble breathing in my lungs. And you and I were on the telephone talking. And you and I have been talking for years, and I always go for walks and talk, and I have no problem with respiration.
Right. And then another way. Hold on. So let's keep the, because I know the story, but the audience, just to keep them understanding what's going on here. If people are under stressful situations, remember what the video I just released talks about. People under stressful situations, it starts to cause an inflammatory response and activating the sympathetic nervous system. All right? And you were talking about having problems with your heart. It was like a tachycardia. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So this is...
Yeah, this, I'm going to get into more, too.
Right. So this is what I'm saying is there's in stressful situations, either physically or emotionally, it can activate this pathway. And that if people have gone through some sort of pathogenic crisis, it reactivates the immune system in such a way that it starts to, cause problems for different people. Okay, so I just want to make sure the audience keeps that in mind as you continue on. All right, go ahead.
Yes, and just to quickly do a quick aside, yes, I also had the reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus in 2017, the apex of not being well, which we've talked about a long time ago on shows. And I was able to reverse all those symptoms with all the things I started this conversation and discussion with, decreasing the toxins, increasing the nutrients, all the different modalities, so on and so forth. So getting back to where we left off, I started having a cascade of different things. And these are not normal for me, especially with how healthy I consider myself. Very active, climbing mountains, yada, yada, yada. So I started having all these different things happening, and I start having a failed root canal on the right side where my right ear is picking up this frequency, and it got so bad, and this root canal had only been a year old almost exactly, that it was wiggling. And I then went in and discovered that I had two failing root canals, one on each side, to where my dentist said to me, is there something you're not divulging that's going on with your health that you haven't told me? And I said, no, I'm great. The only thing I ever had was reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus. That was in 2017. I've been magnificent ever since.
What's important, also another data point, is this is when the mycoplasma situation was happening in China.
Yes. So thank you for mentioning that. And then also keep in mind that I was hearing this frequency in my right ear before this all cascaded. Well, all of this also led to bleeding down below, and it was not a monthly. And I wound up having, long story short, 2 dental extractions, learning about the dangers of root canals, which most people have root canals and don't have these experiences. So it was a little odd. Now, at the same time, I had 3 gerbils. We had a channel called Gerbil TV that I did not let people know I was a part of. And the 3 gerbils all got tumors and died within a few months of me having all of these things happen. So I started wondering what's going on in my house, in my area, and in the Valley of Arizona. So I started feeling these pulses coming through the walls, and I'm jumping farther ahead in the story because there's a lot in between that people don't really need to hear on the show. But I started feeling these pulses coming through the walls, and I started going, what? Am I getting attacked? Like, was it because I went on your show and what I said? How could this be? So then I had a conversation with someone we've gone on shows with named Celeste Solom, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. And we were talking about different things, and we kind of deduced, it must be something to do with EMFs, because I didn't quite fit the category of some of the other things for somebody that would be considered a TI or targeted individual. So then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, well, I know about all these different things from all the different things I've been a part of, which is why I set this up in the beginning of the story, and I know the dangers of smart meters. I moved into this new house in this neighborhood, in this newer side of this older neighborhood in the mountains. Let me do some investigating. So I got an EMF detector, not an expensive one, just a cheaper one, and I started playing around with it. And I went around the walls of my house, and I started noticing where it was pulsing that there was a lot of electrical coming off of there, and what I would even interpret as high magnetic, but I don't have the appropriate tools to really go into how I just kind of sensed that one, I'll say. And then also that the radio frequencies were really high. So I went over to my smart meter, and I had been wanting to get rid of the smart meter, but keep in mind, I had just moved, and then I had all these symptoms. I had to have extractions. And then in the interim, I was escaping to the mountains every week and only coming down for business. So there was a lot of back and forth where I hardly was at this new house that I had all these intentions of doing things with. So I figured out certain walls, and then I started figuring out, okay, the smart meter is pulsing electricity through these wires. These are unshielded wires, and it comes through the walls, and it's pulsing at me. In addition to that, I have neighbors all around in this one little spot that have a lot of different smart devices, Wi-Fi devices. They have garage door openers that are smart garage door openers. They have these Ring cameras. And I live in an area where there are a lot of mansions, so people have a lot of high-tech security stuff because they want to make sure that whoever's coming by is somebody that's local, and then we don't have people just roaming around this area. So, and I kind of live on the border of the mansions and the non-mansions. I'm not in a mansion, and so what I'm getting at is I start feeling these pulses. I'm feeling this dirty electricity coming through the walls. I'm figuring out that the smart meter is an issue. I start taking courses on EMFs. Okay, how can I mitigate? Can I actually fix this problem to live in my house? And then I start journaling. Okay, when am I experiencing this? When am I not? How does it kind of rumble up to a full apex of, oh my gosh, this is unbearable and I can't be in the house, to kind of rumbling back down. Well, I happened to get stuck at my house for 2 days straight, and I decided, I can't take it. It's unbearable in the house. I'm going to go for a walk. So I go for a walk in the neighborhood, And keep in mind, I was hearing this pulse, which I then started really honing in on this, like almost like a woong, woong, woong sound. I'm going to call it the wonga wonga, okay? And so I start really understanding, okay, I'm hearing this woong, 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 and then I'm hearing on top of it some other frequencies that sound like beep, 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 and they're like codes. So I'm like, okay, I'm hearing transmissions, I'm hearing electricity, I'm hearing the smart meter, so on and so forth. So I go for a walk in the neighborhood, and I start hearing boom, boom, boom as I pass each one of these mansions, because I like to walk on the nicer side of the neighborhood. And I'm going, well, this is really interesting, because if I walk in the middle of the road, it dies down, but as I walk closer to these houses, I hear boom, boom, boom,
Well,
boom.
can I interject here, Gail?
I feel it in my chest.
Let me interject.
Okay.
When Sandy happened,
I'm going somewhere with this.
when Sandy happened in New York, and they started to have all the power generators outside the buildings because everything was waterlogged.
Mm-hmm.
When you walked by these power generators, and these power generators were the size of like semi trucks. All right, they were parked right outside of the buildings that were affected in the red zone, and when you pass by, you would feel what you're talking about.
Yes, you can feel it vibrate through your body.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is I'm feeling the smart meters pulsing and vibrating through my body, and auditorily hearing it in my right ear, because I also did train my right ear to hear certain other sounds. So I had actually gone through training with my right ear specifically, that I'm starting to notice each house is having this pulse that I'm physically feeling and auditorily hearing. So then it gets more interesting, because in the interim of all this traveling back and forth in the mountains and having actually to get oral surgery in my jaw due to infections that were part of the cascading of all these, what I'm going to call EMF effects, in combination with some other things, then I had to stay at two different places in a different area of Arizona. And in those places, they had set up a wireless mesh, because they were more remote places where you could not get phone signal. So for these owners of this retreat center, they set up a wireless mesh, and they used an EERO, I think it's called EERO system. And so I started to learn about how those work and the nodes and such. So when I came back and I walked through this neighborhood, all of a sudden it dawns on me that these smart meters are like nodes on a wireless mesh. And because it wasn't just my house pulsing, it was all the different houses pulsing at the same time. Now remember, these smart meters are sending and receiving. It's not like the analog old system. It's going back and forth. So the whole neighborhood was acting like a wireless mesh, sending and receiving at the same time. Well, no wonder I'm feeling these pulses coming through my chest and in my body, and in particular, because I had jaw surgery, that I felt it in my jaw, like, oh my gosh, the pain. So I'm starting to put the pieces together, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I knew about smart meters. I knew about the danger. I also, through my courses, learned you can't just cover them, because it comes through on the other end, and also all the neighbors are pulsing and so on and so forth. So I'm like, oh, it was just like this huge thing. Oh my goodness, because I'm like, I have to, and I notice when I physically drive out of my neighborhood, I feel a sense of relief until I hit the next neighborhood of this kind of situation throughout the valley, or I pass a, let's see, the code word is E7 tower, where I experience a pulse, and I can physically feel it hit me, and then I take my meter, and it does show the RF is pretty high, radio frequency. So what I'm getting at is I was having like, what do you call it, like that building syndrome almost, but it was a neighborhood syndrome on top of it. And I then decided to go down the rabbit hole of, now I really need to not only understand the EMF, how can I mitigate, and what else is going on? And so I went and got, and I'll just throw these out there because I want people to actually do some research for themselves. I went and got Dr. Joseph Mercola's book, EMF'd, and it talks about 5G, Wi-Fi, and cell phones, and the hidden harms and how to protect yourself. Although there's some more information that's not in there that I've also learned on top of what he suggests. I went to the Physicians for Safe Technology to read about the smart meter radiation and health effects. And I went on to many other websites. I have loads and loads of them. In addition to downloading an enormous PDF on smart meters, dirty electricity, pulses, and health by Einar Slidell and Els Nordhagen, which was Norwegian translated into English, which goes into immense detail on how this is all working together. So then I had the realization, okay, I thought here in Arizona they were going to build the smart grid with the smart cities. They already have a smart city prototype called Cul-de-sac. I've driven by it. It's in Tempe, Arizona. I thought they were working on this, but I start to realize, oh my gosh, it's already here. The system is already set up. We are already in a wireless mesh all over the valley, and everything's transmitting back and forth. And I'm not sure if I'm going to go into this in this conversation, but there's more going on than that. But let's just say we are already all connected to the smart grid with these smart devices, and it's the Internet of Things and the Internet of Bodies, which I'll go into another time. And things are already working together in a way that is extremely harmful to people. Well, now let's tie this back into what Paul just was talking about earlier. So Paul was going into how he just interviewed someone, and he was talking about the sympathetic nervous system and the stress and the, let's call it the 2020 crisis. I'm trying to get my code words right here. And he's talking about Mike Adams and the EMFs. And so what I am starting to understand and see is that all the people that I've been talking to that suddenly are having dental issues, failed root canals, all these inexplicable symptoms, it's a combination of what we went through in 2020 all the way through now, and what Paul is calling the long COVID, wait, can I use that word? The long
hauler.
The long 2020 syndrome.
Long hauler.
Long hauler. Okay, long hauler syndrome. Thank you. I have to get my code words correct here. And this EMF issue that's enormous. Okay, so I also want to quickly mention, I went through and thought, is there a way that I could stay in my house and not have to relocate? But if this whole mesh is set up in the neighborhood, even if I went through mitigation, and let me explain what that means, not just putting a cover over your smart meter. If I had the smart meter taken out, if I solved the dirty electricity problem, if I put the shielding paint, yes, shielding paint exists, all over my walls, and if I got the curtains that block the EMFs and the, what do we call them, E7 towers and such, and if I were to maybe have a kill switch for my bedroom, for instance, and turn off all the power, and go through the whole slew of different things that one can do, the moment I step outside my compound barricade, fort, if I were to create this, I would still be bombarded. And then I'd have to go into wearing these obnoxious-looking clothes to try to block the EMFs.
What just clicked in my mind, Gail, and I apologize because our conversations are organic. This may be the reason why some of these multimillionaires are building like 3-layer bunkers below the ground.
This is why. Because it's already here, Paul. We thought they were building it. We thought this was in progress. It's already here, on and popping, as one of my friends would say. And the bigger thing is...
What did she call it? On and pop?
Well, no, I was joking around. One of my friends, she jokes around. She says it's on and popping. It's like
on and popping. Okay.
So it was just something funny. me to throw it because, I'm being so serious, might as well throw in, some funny slang. So, yeah, she would say it's on and popping, right? So what I'm getting at is if we have this worldwide situation with the long hauler, and we've all gone through what we went through from 2020 on, and we have these frequencies beaming at us 24/7, how can our bodies even begin to go into a state of repairing themselves and getting better when it's coming from all angles? And beyond this, we know it's coming from the air, the soil, the water, the food, and those are all separate topics for another day. But we are in a state of danger, Will Robinson, because where do we go from here? How do we properly mitigate and navigate? Because now, like the person that you were just talking to on the show before, Sandra, I believe is the name. She's describing all these things that she's been experiencing, and then I'm telling you all, firsthand experience here of what I've been going through and the research I had to go through, and now I'm going to have to relocate. But again, can I even find an area that I can relocate to, or do I need to totally go off grid without all this technology?
Well, let me intervene here. Let me interject just real quick.
Sure.
I just want to remind the audience that long hauler can be activated through stress. Now that stress could be financial stress, that could be EMF stress, that could be some sort of post-traumatic stress that's emotional stress or whatever, or some sort of some sort of you get sick and there's some sort of pathogenic stress, but then you start getting the fatigue and these complex series of symptoms that we're classifying under the long hauler syndrome. All right, so I don't want the impression from the audience to think that long hauler is only activated or exacerbated by EMF. The point here, though, is that EMF can be a contributing factor in adding to stress, activating this sympathetic system that if people had, let's say, Epstein-Barr, it may reactivate it. Or if you had GBS, it may reactivate it. Or if you have some sort of autoimmune disorder, it may reactivate it, right? So there's two stories here. So don't, I just don't want the audience to feel as though EMF is the only cause for long hauler. It's not. But the thing is that you may not even have had the inoculation or the pathogen in 2020, and you may get some sort of EMF hit in your neighborhood or in your house, especially if it's a new build, where you may start seeing things that just don't feel right with your body. Inflammation or dermatology issues or dermatological issues or maybe eyesight issues or, more frequent headaches or whatever, teeth pain, So there's a lot of manifestations of this. So just, keep that in mind. I think the thing that is common between what Sandra said yesterday and what I'm publishing it out today, and what Gail is saying is that that the central nervous system can be perturbated in such a way where it causes a lot of problems, and how that is perturbated can, that modality, one of those modalities could be EMF. So, I just wanted to keep that.
I want to actually dovetail into what you just said. So I'm looking at Finland interviews Dr. Mercola about EMF, which is his book, from December 27th, 2022. By the way, Dr. Mercola has made his articles now free and available, and he's putting them back up. He was censored, and he had to only have them up for 48 hours, and then he had them behind a paywall. He is reimbursing those people that did have their subscriptions during that time period that he was censored. So anyhow, you can go ahead and actually access this article for free now, because I know that was an issue for a lot of people. And the story at a glance goes into electromagnetic fields, EMFs, cause massive mitochondrial dysfunction, thus raising the risk for and worsening chronic and degenerative diseases. And so I'm highlighting that because that's pretty much what we're talking about here is, we went through all that we went through, and of course, having to be very vague here. And now we're seeing an uptick in all these different problems for all these different people. And it goes into a perfect storm of DNA and cellular protein and membrane destruction is created when you aren't burning fat for fuel and then get exposed to EMFs. That's on the side. But it also talks about the wireless industry effectively prevents the public from knowing the truth and demanding safer products. And then another wireless industry strategy prevents the problem from becoming public knowledge, capturing the federal regulatory agencies. It goes into Elon Musk's Starlink project, which deployed 42,000 satellites into orbit. And I was telling Paul in a private conversation that also there's the project Kuiper, Kuiper, that Amazon is going to be putting up another 3,000 or so satellites that they want to service the areas that wouldn't otherwise get serviced. So they really want to cover every part of this whole world. And so it goes on to continue. We'll blanket the entire planet with 5G internet frequencies, which you won't be able to escape. And so it goes into a bunch of things. Those are like the highlights of the article that somebody can go and read that they might find very interesting.
Now what's interesting with this for the audience, mm-hmm. you and I have already talked about this. Through the crisis and the build out of this network, now you can modulate a response by increasing the electromagnetic frequency. If a certain group of people are not behaving the way they should be in the eyes of the government, they can make you not feel well. Either nauseous, mm-hmm. have headache, feel fatigued. So literally, you have there is an electronic means to physiologically activate the sympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, and we've seen this done with the military. You remember during the protests and during this whole 2020 situation, where they would use a frequency and it would cause someone to feel like they were burning, to make them vomit, to actually receive burns on their faces. And this is just an extension of that all across the globe, because and this was the next thing I was going to go into is frequencies, right? We can use frequencies for healing, and I've gone to some sound therapy sessions where frequencies are used to help the body heal itself. And then I've gone to where frequencies in my neighborhood are pulsing and physically debilitating me. And so what we have here is a really big problem, in my opinion, because if this is being allowed and there aren't, well, first of all, people aren't being educated on a worldwide scale, because if they were to educate people and people were to realize, and then secondly, like I mentioned, oh my gosh, almost 5 years ago on a show with my friend Flurburn, I said no longer will you be able to use guns. Guns are going to be useless, because if they're going to be able to remote control or use a frequency of some sort, whether it's because you have something in you or it's just being pulsed at you, what is your line of defense other than literally wearing some kind of suit or habitating somewhere where they can't beam at you?
Well, like I was saying with Mike Adams I think it was the last show that we did together. And remember Boba Fett or whatever, however you pronounce it, for Star Wars?
Oh, Boba Fett?
Right, Boba Fett. And
yeah,
what?
Boba
However,
Fett.
yeah.
Boba Fett. That's
Boba Fett.
Boba Fett.
Boba Fett.
Yeah.
All right. So Boba Fett, he was in a suit, right? And I was saying that everyone's going to be walking around like Boba Fett because of a airborne version of HIV. But the thing is that you can extrapolate this same concern that I had with pathogens and trying to protect the body by being in some sort of suit to having a suit that is fighting against electromagnetic. And so when people keep on saying, "Oh, you need a chip, and you need a chip, and you need a chip in the body," and all that, no, you don't. I don't think you do. I think that there is a means now that the frequencies are high enough, and that we're learning how to modulate those frequencies to activate the sympathetic system to cause individuals to not feel well. Now, what is interesting is that, some people don't get affected. Now, I'm willing to bet that if you take a look at the data, if you take a look at the ones that aren't affected, they're usually more peaceful. They're living in some sort of peaceful kind of situation where they haven't been attacked pathogenically, and they stay away from social media, and they stay away from the TV news, so they're not being bombarded by this constant polarization of politics and hate and all this stuff. I think those types of people have a better control of their sympathetic nervous system, and they're more often in parasympathetic. And the ones that are constantly watching the news, or on the battlefield, or they're all stressed out, and it doesn't take much for the EMF to be able to put them over the edge. Now, Sandra says it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think that's fair. I think there's something to that. Is that the way to try to fight this is to try to stay in parasympathetic. The thing is that modern society is stressful, and most people are in sympathetic. So it's not very practical to try to not everybody can be the Dalai Lama, right? So that gets back to my discussions with you a long time ago, and that is that that there's only one real solution to this, Gail, and that is kinetic.
I do want to, before we start that kind of conversation, I want to touch upon something you just said about we no longer need a chip. Before we go into the kinetic discussion, we need to talk about, so when I first went on 5 years ago talking about things, and I was coming to realize that DNA can be used as a hard drive to store information, and Neuralink, 5 years ago we were talking about, the chip and the thread, and then how they could remote control pretty much, even though you'd have access to certain things, somebody would be in control of you with a remote. Okay, so we thought that a chip was needed this whole time, and we've been talking about that for ages. How are they going to get that into us? Well, like you just said, they don't need a chip. Well, piggybacking on that discussion, I started looking into the IEEE and the standards, and started looking into wireless personal area networks and the frequency, which is actually very harmful and penetrates the tissues, of 2.4 gigahertz. And I started looking into some protocols, and I'm just going to put this out there. I want people to just type these in and start reading. I'm not going to say too much about it. Type in IEEE 802.15.4, then do the same for 802.15.5 and 802.15.6, and start reading about those, and then start reading more again about the wireless body area Area Network, WBAN, and start looking into the medical uses. And I'm going to give you some more things I want people to do their homework and look into. So bear with me. I'm just going to go through because there's quite a bit. I want you to also start researching the 6G LOPAN, LOPAN. PAN is a personal area network. And I want you to, let me see all the things I've printed out. I want you to look into the DoD Directive 3000.09, Autonomy and Weapons Systems. And I want you to look into the next generation of non-surgical neurotechnology. And I want you to look into, I'm going to go into more, just bear with me, I have to turn my pages, kind of like Alex Jones over here. I want you to look into piezoelectricity in the bone marrow. I'm mispronouncing that. It's spelled Piezo, electricity. And continue here. Just give me a moment. I'm going to go through all my notes. I want you to look up also SOSA and MOSA, SOSA and MOSA. And I am not an IT person, but I started researching these, and my mind was like, OMG. Let me get more here. I know I have more. I just need to figure out where I put it. I also want people to look up something else. Just bear with me. Go ahead and look up High Accuracy Detection Exploitation System, HADES. And go ahead and look up the Program Executive Office of IEW&S, Electronic Warfare and Sensors. And let's see what else. And the reason I'm not going to go into this myself is I actually want people to start just typing these in and reading this stuff because it's really interesting. And then, just one more moment here. And then also look up the textbook on human interaction, emerging technologies and future systems 5, which is written as a V. There's a textbook on Amazon. It's about $100. And I want people to draw their own conclusions as to how they really don't need a chip anymore. And also, I'm going to pose this as a question. I'm going to sound like Gaia here. Could they actually be using us as a node in their wireless mesh system, Internet of Things, Internet of Bodies? And I will leave it at that because I'm not going to say 100% one way or another, but I want people to type those in and look those up and start thinking about it. Because I have a feeling that there's an extra layer here of this isn't just the long hauler syndrome. This isn't just the EMFs physically pulsing. But I suspect that we are being accessed in a way that we didn't realize. And that's, comes back to the
Well, I'm not sure if access is the right word. Perturbated or manipulated or modulated, I would use.
Mm-hmm.
Access, leads to a whole another set of discussions.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But
I
think that
but they are using frequency bands for medical treatments, and that's the direction that they're going.
Mm-hmm.
So if they can access us remotely for medical treatments, then that just kind of tells you, why would you build out this whole Internet of Things, right? So we are part of that smart technology.
Well, I would, everything has a natural frequency, and that if you are shooting a frequency at a structure, no matter if it's a biological structure or inorganic structure, and that frequency isn't let's say that frequency is lower than its natural frequency, then it's not going to do anything. But if you have a structure that's at its natural frequency, you can vibrate it. So there's definitely kind of a remote, there is a kind of, it seems to the naked eye that it's a remote access, I'll use your word, but some sort of remote manipulation, but it's not really remote because it's the wave that has to hit the body. So it's not an action from a distance in its purest form. An action from a distance means you're from a distance and there is no physical thing hitting you. There is a physical thing hitting the body, and that's a wave.
Absolutely. Yeah,
but from a naked eye, it seems as though it's an action from a distance. Now, but you can perturb certain organ systems, especially the central nervous system. And when this happens, then the central nervous system gets perturbated and it says, oh, I'm in a sympathetic state. I have to create cortisol. I have to increase pro-inflammatory cytokines. Oh, it activates maybe macrophages and Th1 CD4 cells. And then all of a sudden you start having some sort of immune reaction. You start getting inflammation. You start having, aging problems, or you start having, aches and pains, or whatever it is. But the point here is that this can happen outside of the whole electromagnetic spectrum by just stress. This memory of something that can reactivate the sympathetic nervous system. Or you can activate it through the EMF. Where by the naked eye, it seems like it.
The reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus is a reactivation. It's just like you're describing. There's something, the straw that breaks the camel's back, as you said earlier, then causes you to go through that all over again.
Right, and those are in the axons of a nerve. So I mean, when you're perturbating the nerve, then it's activating. It can reactivate the virus. With it, for Epstein-Barr. So, I think people need to pay attention. My take here, Gail, is that we're being boxed in. We're being boxed in through many different ways. And it's not just, we've moved into a new era. It's not just biological warfare. It is modulated EMF biological warfare. And that if someone, they can now dial in some sort of post cranial nerve response. And that's starting, I've run this simulation in my head a million times, Gail. I honestly, logically cannot come to, when you do the game theory, when you run it through your brain, I cannot come up with a solution to the problems that we're in modern society other than war. I don't see any other way. You can't hide. They'll get you somehow, some way. You can't prep your way out of this because somehow they'll clamp down on how you're prepping. Or you'll run out of goods. No man is an island, right?
Well, yeah, if you can modulate someone with a frequency and they're trying to prep or they're trying to fight back, this is a big issue. So unless you can control the frequency coming out, or you have a safe zone where that frequency can't penetrate through you, you can then try to have the war that you're describing. But remember, I said that it no longer will guns be effective or anything, because you're going to have to fight the frequency with an equal opposite frequency.
Well, I think this is one of the takeaways from 1984, and that is you can't let Big Brother and the one eye get built, because it's hard to take it down.
And my thing is, what if it's already here? So we have to figure out.
No, but it'll get worse. It is here. I agree with you. It is here, but it's going to get worse over time. There's a difference between it's here and 50 years of encroachment using this kind of modality. So I think we're at a cross. It would have been better if this was done 10 years ago, what I'm talking about. But if this continues on, it's going to be harder to be able to fight the system. And this is where I'm using the term that's borrowed from some sort of tactical operation. If Taiwan gets hit by China, we need to break the nest. We actually literally have to destroy our modern day technology. We have to break the nest, because if we don't, we're going to lose our ability to have autonomy. Not just autonomy, from a civil liberty perspective, just an autonomy of just the health of our body. But people are going to be comfortable. This is the sad thing I have about that. People they'll just be comfortably numb and, love their bread and circus and, think it's not a big deal. And the next generation, the generation that hasn't been born won't know any better. And, and it just, they move right into this 1984 thing. But when I look at this,
different components. There needs to be the education, which is what people are trying to do, but then there's the censorship. There needs to be a solution if they're going to try to block us from, fighting back of an equal opposite frequency or controlling.
The only way to fight this type of thing that we're talking about, this EMF manipulation, is to do an EMP on the society.
Well, that'll come in the future, but about 20 years.
And I don't remember the ending for Terminator, but wasn't that something? Isn't that what they did? Wasn't it the humans? They tried to destroy the grid. They tried to do this. They destroy the grid to kill the Terminators or something like that. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I remember they blew up a bunch of stuff, but I'm trying to remember if that was taking down the grid. It's been so long, but it's interesting you brought up Terminator. My kids and I were just talking about Terminator. They've never seen it. They actually don't watch anything violent. But I want to introduce them to it in a careful way, because I feel like the movies from the 80s and 90s are really applicable to what we're seeing happen. And we grew up at that time, and so we got to watch these things play out and think about them and philosophize about them and so on. And so Terminator came up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that whole concept, it's slowly happening. And people, when I was in high school, used to joke around and call me Sarah Connor because I was always working out and like the buff, the buff lady. And so yeah, go ahead, continue about Terminator. But
I just think, I think the key takeaway is that, you gotta break the nest. If you don't break the nest, the technology keeps on happening, and we were lucky in this country to have some wise people during the early founding of the country, and have the resources and the space and all this to start a whole new country. I don't think we have enough people that are wise enough and dedicated enough to maintain it, to maintain freedom. We're literally seeing, and the philosophical way to look at this is that we're no longer autonomous. We don't have autonomy. We're slowly becoming enslaved to a new Egypt. How the Jews went into Egypt slowly. Joseph goes there, right? Because of the he's being sold as because from his brothers, right? He goes he gets to Egypt. He's in prison for a long time, and then all of a sudden he ends up, because he can interpret a dream, and save Egypt from famine, right? But the rest of the region around Egypt is suffering from the famine. So, Egypt starts to gain some power because they prepared for the famine from Joseph. But Joseph's family ends up needing to migrate to Egypt because of the famine. Well, eventually, the term's called Golis, but we were slowly going into Golis because of famine. And then, there was years of slavery that ensued after Joseph dies. Well, this is happening now. We're we are slowly moving into slavery through this technology build out.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that own the technology, the government, official, the government apparatus, this is the new Egypt. And the means to control us is through this technology. Well, either there's going to be some sort of grand savior, some godhead that comes and, says, let my people go or something. Or, and I don't want to bet on that, because I doubt that would happen. But, but the thing is that people are just slowly walking into goalless. They're slowly walking into their slavery for 400 years because of this. The only way to stop it is to destroy the technology. Now, I know that if we did destroy it, you and I wouldn't have this conversation because these phones and all that would be gone.
We need to go and do a whole education. So I think what comes before that is not only are we teaching people what's going on, but we need to educate them on how can they go back to the basics of living, like maybe study the Amish, there's going to be a whole thing before you can take down the whole system and shut it off, per se, or, just turn everything off, is what I mean to say, then the society right now doesn't know how to grow anything. They don't know how to trade. They're so dependent on the system. That's why when we were going through the world situation back in 2020, I was telling people, if everyone grew a little bit of food, if we didn't have these HOAs inhibiting people from even using their front yard to grow food.
Yeah, but Gail, I don't think that the average person, that has, a typical suburban lot would be able to grow enough food for their family. So the current population in the world would drastically go down if it wasn't for modern farming. I mean, we're talking about like
something and share. That's one
billions.
Idea. Yeah, modern farming does help feed everyone.
Well, I mean, there's
like if we didn't have this technology, we would have to go back to like when I talked to my friend Krishna, whom I get the oils from in India. He said that they didn't really get affected as much with the closures in 2020 because they all had their small communities where they were already growing and trading and doing all their own little things. So they had access to plenty. I don't know if that's fully changing, but ideas.
There was a lot of people in the truther movement that kept on thinking that the Georgia Guidestones was some sort of secret society thing or Illuminati thing, and that it was evil. You know what? I'm starting to think it wasn't evil. It was a warning. That's where this is all heading to. A 500 million population, and a certain because it's going to be the destruction of most of modern civilization. It's going to mean revert back to some basic ethic principles, and that if you break those ethic principles, then you're going to have an unstable society. And it was a warning. It's not an evil thing. It's just that's where everything's heading. And unfortunately, there's a lot of stupid truthers out there that think that they understand on how things are, and they just they want to blame everything on the Illuminati, or they want to blame everything on the some sort of secret society. They want to blame everything, but the reality is it's all of mankind's interactions leading to the inevitable.
It's intricate, and it would be wonderful if we had a group of people, unlike the current group of people, that would sit together and kind of think of really good solutions for everyone. But I actually need to get going. I have another show to go to, and I have to prepare. So I apologize, but I need to skedaddle.
All right. Okay. All right. Let me stop the recording here.